Welcome back, everyone, to the Comics Cube, and today we are talking about the death and return of Superman. Hey, Paul, what are we doing today?
We're talking about one of the biggest events, comic events of the 90s, where DC actually killed Superman, and then after a while, he got better again. But I'm not really doing it justice with that description. It was a huge event, but the weird thing about it, it kind of came about almost by accident. Like DC Comics wanted to marry Superman to Lois Lane, but at the time, Lois and Clark, the TV series was on, starring everyone's favorite right-wing contrarian Dean Cain. and they wanted to marry Lois and Clark, but they wanted to leave it a bit, wasn't it?
Gotta say, my favorite Lois Lane.
She is brilliant. Yeah, I mean, for all Dean Cain's faults, that show had one of the best Lois Lanes and one of the best Lex Luthors as well.
Well, yeah, I'll leave that one up to you, Paul.
Oh, fair enough. Sorry. I might be in the minority on that. Yeah, so they wanted to marry Lois and Clark eventually, but they wanted to give it a few series first. So DC Comics suddenly had to delay the marriage of Superman and Lois Lane. And so they were like, oh, what can we do? And I think someone suggested as a joke, oh, we could just kill him. And so that's what they did. They killed him and sort of accidentally came up with this huge event that sold millions and millions of copies of the Superman comics. And it's still talked about this day and still has characters involved in it active in the comics today. And then eventually, after he got better, he did marry Lois Lane. And they all lived happily ever after.
He gets killed.
Apart from 2011 to 2016.
He gets killed by a monster created for the storyline named Doomsday. And that was, the writers involved here were Dan Jurgens, Jerry Ordway, Louise Simonson, and Roger Stern. I was gonna miss Roger Stern of all people. And the artists were Dan Jurgens, also Tom Grummett, John Bogdanov, and was it Butch Guice?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was on Adventures. Yeah,
it was Butch Guice. I wanted to say Kerry Gamil. I'm like, no, he came much earlier. So LaMar, what did you think of the death when it happened, when it was announced in 1992, and when they actually did it?
Well, honestly, when this one happened, this was what, 1992, right?
1992.
So, at that time, I was 12, and to be honest with you, I didn't really think they were going to do it, right? I thought they were going to run an audible, to use a football terminology, and fake us out at the end. But the way they did it, with like Doomsday kind of going through the motions of like decimating all of these people that were close to Superman and things like that. And then we even see him like killing children and things. So that at that point, I was just kind of like, okay, yeah, maybe there's something to this, right? And where I lived probably about 5 or 6 miles away from the LCS. And, I grew up in North Carolina. So that meant that I had to ride my bike 5 or 6 miles down the main highway to get to the comic shop. So it was really exciting because we didn't have the internet. So you didn't really know what was going to happen. And so even with something as big as Superman, that's just kind of ubiquitous, you still don't know what's going to happen. So that was kind of what pulled me in.
And when they finally killed him, what do you think?
When I got to which I guess we'll talk about that later, about how that final issue in Superman 75, where everything is just a splash page, like all of the pages, and the series itself is kind of working towards that, where you have these several panels, and then it gets down to less panels, and then less panels, and then you get to it's all splash pages in 75. And you get to that last page, I was just like, hold up, wait a minute, that wasn't supposed to happen, you know. So but it was weird though, actually trying to go to the LCS to get the comic that day, because there was literally a line going almost 2.5 blocks down for people trying to get into the store, because they had to tell people, hey, listen, y'all can't be curving the lines around the shelves, you have to go outside. And I don't think I'd ever seen that before, and I haven't seen it since, to be honest with you.
No. What about you, Paul?
So I was 11 when they announced it, and I was very naive, and so I thought that was it. He was dead forever now when they announced it, like, because Nightfall was going on as well, and I was still thinking, my children and grandchildren are going to be reading about John Paul Valley as Batman. I thought that was it. Bruce Wayne's gone. Because I was only a kid and I didn't know. And I wasn't cynical like I am now, you know. So I thought, that's it, they're killing off Superman. So this is a bit embarrassing, but I'm going to say it anyway. So what I did, I got my little Superman figure, and I got my Superman action figure, one of those like superpowers ones, you know, and put him under my Batcave tie as a sort of burial. And I sort of held a little funeral for my action figure. And like, I think 11's far too old to be doing stuff like that. But I was really sad about it. And, but I didn't have...
That is by far the best story anyone's ever told on this show. Paul is going to regret ever telling us this story.
Don't tell Ben.
Cut.
This is gonna be up on the group like immediately.
Yeah.
Yo.
No.
So I've always been sort of overly emotionally attached to these things. But I didn't have easy access to a comic shop, so it was only my local newsagents in our town, and they did the odd American comic. They had the American Superman comic occasionally, but they didn't have Adventures in Action and Man of Steel. They did have British reprints of the American stuff.
because England has its own comic industry.
Yeah. So
that makes sense. Okay.
So I got the British reprints of the American stuff, but of course that was 2 or 3 years behind. So I think we were still we were still being introduced to the Eradicator at that point, and I think Jimmy Olsen had just got his stretchy powers and stuff. And, so I couldn't actually follow it in the comics. But then I went to a bookshop in Cardiff. My mother took me there, like about a year later, and by then the trade paperback was out, and I always remember this because we were talking to a person who worked in this bookshop, and he must have been a guy in his 20s. And I wanted to just buy a comic, like buy a graphic novel. And my mother was really surprised that this adult was really into comics, and he was recommending Batman Year One, Dark Knight Returns, and all this stuff. And then I saw Death of Superman. I was like, wow, Death of Superman, I got to get this. And he was like, oh, you want that one, do you? like I'd let him down. But so I always try and remember that experience as an adult, not to not to do that to kids, basically.
Not to do that. Why would this
Yeah.
11-year-old want to read The Death of Superman instead of Batman Year One?
Yeah. So and then when I got that, that was amazing. Even though I was convinced he was really dead, I was very excited. And then I got to follow his resurrection in bits and bobs then through the newsagents. So that was really exciting as well.
See, I knew he wasn't really dead. And the reason I knew he wasn't really dead was because my mom gave me a news article. She gave me the newspaper and said, there's something about Superman on the front page. And I looked at it and it said, we're killing off Superman. And it was this big announcement. And towards the end, I think it was Jeanette Khan saying, we're not killing him forever. We're going to bring him back again.
Oh.
Oh, so
See, if only I had read that.
Your mom invented the spoiler then, huh?
Pretty much. And now, see, the thing is, if they do the Death of Superman now, they would totally try to play it like he was dead forever.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way. And you know what? They should, because like I bought the issue where he dies, and I'm like, I know he's gonna be back. I just want the issue because everyone's buying it. So what did everyone think of Doomsday? I know a lot of people think he's just a Hulk ripoff. I feel like they should have given him the ability to talk. But anyway, what did everyone think of Doomsday?
You got it, Paulie. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I really like him, and I really liked him at the time, and I love the idea of this absolute force of nature that can't be stopped. And I suppose he's kind of Hulk without all the sort of humanity, all the humanity sucked out of him. So he's almost like a particularly violent hurricane or something. And they've never really lived up to him since then. I think Superman Doomsday Hunter Prey was the last story I read of him that I think was any good, really. And
was it really any good? Was it really any good?
I really like that. Superman's got a sword for some reason. But yeah, what I liked about Superman Doomsday Hunter Prey as well was that Superman was like, oh no, Doomsday, and he was like genuinely scared. Like, how are we going to handle Doomsday now? He killed me before, and he was a proper massive threat. And ever since then, it's just been like, he's kind of been like Worf in Star Trek Next Generation, in that if you want to prove that the bad guy who's just beamed onto the bridge of the Enterprise is like a real badass, you get Worf to run at him and then get swatted away. It's like, wow, he swatted away Worf. He must be really hard. And Doomsday's the same now. Like in Our Worlds at War, when Imperiex came, he was like the villain of the month of the event. And they put Doomsday up against him. He just killed Doomsday straight away. And it's like, oh, Imperiex must be great because he just killed Doomsday. And that's how Doomsday's been used ever since. And he's never really lived up to that potential, I think. But I like him.
It's the DC equivalent of Firelord.
Yes.
You like him, LaMar?
I kind of feel like Doomsday is a mixed bag. And mostly it's because of the way he's been handled subsequently, like what Paulie was talking about. But they did a really good job of building him up throughout the series and like before that, like when because he had the whole because he was new, so it wasn't like he was somebody who got a power upgrade or something, and they're like,
they job out the entire Justice League to him.
Everybody now, and of course, I wouldn't say that was the best iteration of the Justice League, but it really doesn't matter because
Justice League.
It's the Justice League, right? So he comes in and he's beating the brakes off of people, and he's doing it with one hand behind his back, like literally. And that was always like the playground thing. I could beat you with one hand behind my back, but this guy actually did it to the whole JLA, and so. It was really hard to tell where he was going, whether he was just going to be a one-off. But I'm actually going back to what Paulie was saying about Hunter Prey. I think that probably was the last time he was dealt with any kind of justice, because he moved up from that realm of just being a plot device. And so they just put him right back into the plot device box right after that. And it affected the continuity so much because they jobbed out Darkseid to him. And so they had to create this whole thing about Darkseid and the avatars and things. And so it was like, yeah, well, when Doomsday beat me, that was just one of my avatars. And he only had like 5% of my strength. And, they had to do all of that stuff to fix all that stuff. Because with a character like Darkseid, you can't just kind of like shoo it away.
You cannot job out Darkseid, no.
Yeah. That part was just insane to me. I think I stopped reading the book when I got to that part. And then I picked it up like maybe a couple months later.
That's why when Paul was like, oh yeah, that was the last one that was any good, I was like, was it really? It's the book that invented Jobberside.
But yeah, there was another story. I can't remember. It was like years later though, but there was this story where Superman was like tied up in this. I can't even remember who the villain was, but he was tied up, had Superman tied up for years, and he had this old man beard and all this other kind of stuff. And he was buried under the ground. And Doomsday in the future, he's basically like an acolyte for Superman. So he kind of pounds his way through the ground and he rescues Superman. He's kind of hanging on this cross, and he pulls him down off the cross. And Paulie, you know the story I'm talking about?
It's the end of Chuck Austin's Action Comics run.
See, there you go. See, I knew you knew what I was talking about.
I was thinking if Paul knew, he would say what it is. But no, he knew the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It actually wasn't bad. It was Chuck Austin and Ivan Reis and Mark Campos doing the inks. But
for reference to our viewers, Paul is our resident Superman historian and expert and encyclopedia. And we all like Superman, but Paul's got him, imprinted in his mind.
I buried the action figures.
Yeah, it's nowhere but down from there. You know what I mean? Oh my God, that story is great. But yeah, Doomsday. I think and I'm not even going to mention Doomsday like in the live action movie. We just, I'm not going to get into it. I'm just going to keep it to the comics. But
sorry, Paul.
I haven't. I'll leave that for you if you want to get into that. But I don't know. I think that probably was the last time he was really handled with any sort of like character development. And gosh, that series that was over 10 years ago. So I don't really know what's going on with Doomsday now. I'm not sure. So somebody would have to fill me in on that.
And after he dies, after they basically both kill each other, and the question is asked, why didn't Superman just throw him into the sun? Because I don't know why. The most critically acclaimed part of this whole thing is Funeral for a Friend.
Mm-hmm.
Any memories of that particular? Any memories, thoughts of that particular arc, other than it was really good? Because
I like the focus on Lois, and the grief she was going through felt really authentic. I think everyone's grief felt really authentic. It wasn't just sort of like comic character crying, I mean, obviously she did cry, but they felt like real people reacting to a real event. And considering how fantastic the world they live in is, I think that's quite a feat. And I really enjoyed that focus on these sort of lesser known characters. And I also really like sort of, now and again, they littered a bit of a red herring in the story. Like, there's this really, in that Legacy of Superman one shot they did, there's a character called Auron, I'm not sure how you say it, Auron. And he's like a clone who flies off into space with Superman's DNA for some reason. And
comics are so great.
Yeah. It's like, I have to do this. And he just goes. And I didn't pick up on it at the time, but in retrospect, that's obviously a red herring for when Cyborg turns up, or we're meant to think, or when the Kryptonian turns up, and you think, is he
Yeah.
Goron? And so I like, in retrospect, reading these issues and picking up on these little red herrings that they planted in. Like,
Interesting. LaMar, you got any favorite memories of Funeral?
Aside from, because the lowest part I thought was probably my favorite part, and also there were just certain details that they had, like when Superman's, like when they're bringing his body through the streets on the carriage, and the members of the Justice League are like, and it's not the members of the Justice League that got beat up, it's like the core Justice League, like, and they're carrying his body through the street, and everybody's like, well, wait a minute, where's Batman? And then Batman's kind of like hanging off of a building because he's like trying to control the crime and stuff, so that Superman gets his actual respect, and that nobody, people aren't doing all this wild stuff in the streets and things like that. And he kind of tells this guy that he catches, he's like, hey man, listen, I'm basically not going to beat the crap out of you today and cripple you, because Superman wouldn't want me to do that, and this is his city, so this is the one time you get a pass, from me doing what I do to folks. So I thought that the personal touches like that were kind of missing in the lead up to Superman's death. So for them to actually take another storyline to address everything, I thought was a really good idea. And I thought that they handled it really well.
Yeah, I think the death of Superman in some way or another has been adapted into so many cartoons, the movies and everything. It's just, it works when Superman is dead because you see how people react to it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For me, my favorite issue is the one where Jonathan Kent has that dream and he goes and sees Kismet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is the DC version of Eternity.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen her in anything else since or before, but it's just like, for something that was printed on newsprint, like having that kind of effect where he's kind of like translucent and ghost-like and everything. It was just kind of new to me at the time. It just kind of blew my mind the way that story was done, and it just kind of shows you how close Superman is to his Earth dad. And
I think that was when I was saying about the authentic grief. I think we had that with Lois, just seeing her trying to live afterwards, but also with Jonathan Kent as well, was one of the most authentic portrayals of grief before he has his heart attack. It's almost like he's checked out, and it's almost really heartbreaking. It's like he's numb and he's just, he's not there anymore because he's so grief-stricken. And that was one of the most affecting parts for me, the lead up to his heart attack and that issue you described.
I think a small thing that was really heartbreaking is the fact that the Kents couldn't really go to the funeral and be like, that's our son.
Yeah.
That was sad. That was sad.
Yeah.
All right. When they, after funeral, should we mention something about Supergirl? Because she was a pretty big part of the storyline, and now we're getting to Reign of the Supermen, and we haven't mentioned Supergirl at all.
When I picked up that Death of Superman trade paperback, I didn't know about Matrix. I hadn't read those issues in the British reprints. So when all of a sudden Supergirl turns into a blob, I'm like, what? Why is that happened? And I was like, is she like really burned or something? Like, is that why she looks like that? And it was only later I found out about Matrix. Like,
there's three things in the storyline that don't age well: Supergirl being Matrix, Lex Luthor having hair and a beard, and Lex Luthor dating Supergirl.
Yeah. That was kind of creepy, if you ask me. I mean, even then, I thought it was a little creepy.
It's really weird, and he's in a cloned body of himself, and he's pretending to be his own son.
Yeah.
And in the actual Death of Superman, he doesn't mention that he's the real Lex at any point. So again, I read that and I thought they've killed off Lex Luthor. Wow, they've replaced Lex Luthor with this guy. And it was only when I read Return of Superman, Reign of the Superman, I realized, oh, it is Lex Luthor. Yeah. But I
Yes.
didn't bury Lex Luthor.
Okay. we get to Reign of the Superman, and so basically at the end of Funeral, you have like a preview of the 4 guys who could be Superman, and those guys are the Kid, who is a clone of Superman. He would eventually become Superboy. John Henry Irons, or Steel, who I'm going to go ahead and say is the closest thing the DC universe has to Iron Man. Safe to say.
Yeah.
The Kryptonian and the Cyborg. And then they each debut in one of the 4 titles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I love those covers, the cutout covers with the S. Anyway, which of these Supermen was your favorite when this was all going on? Paul?
Cyborg, definitely. But that was mainly because my newsagent only got Superman and not Adventures or Action or Man of Steel. So I only ever had the Cyborg part of the story. But I was, like I said, I was really naive. I was completely suckered in. And I thought, yeah, this is the real deal. And he just looked so cool as well. I just thought he looked awesome. And just that, like, sort of the way technology kind of grew out of him, I just thought that was so great. And then he had Professor Hamilton's seal of approval, and he had Clinton's seal of approval. And so, yeah, he's still my favorite even today.
When you're reading it?
Yeah, definitely.
Even knowing what's coming?
Even if I know what a git he is, I still think he's best.
What was your favorite, LaMar?
I think my favorite was John Henry, because I think that he was the character who was the most like Superman in his purpose and his spirit. And also obviously John Henry Irons was inspired by John Henry and from the folk tale, which in a little bit of history, John Henry is actually a real person. Most people don't know that, but
He is. I thought he was
yeah.
I thought he was exactly what you said, a folktale.
Well, he's
Do explain.
Okay, all right. Well, there was actually a person who did exist that worked for the railroads and stuff like that when they were trying to send the railroads through the mountains, and they ended up coming up with this machine that they thought would remove the need for human labor, because of course in a physical environment like that, and there's all this dust flying all over the places, you have a lot of people getting sick, and then there are all these like really bad injuries with people losing limbs and stuff. So these people felt like, okay, well, what we're going to do, we're going to commission a somebody to create a machine to get rid of that, to get rid of the human workforce. And so, and you got to remember, this is during this is after chattel slavery is a thing. So so it's like the late 19th, early 20th century when all this stuff is happening. So what ends up happening is these people who created these machines, they weren't well designed. The engineering on them was terrible. So the machines would run for 10 or 15 minutes and then they conk out, and it might take you days to fix them, right? So because of that, they had to keep the human workforce. And so that's kind of where you have the metaphor with John Henry versus the steel driving machine and stuff like that. And so like when he beats the machine, but he barely beats it, then he drops dead, which also is kind of a parallel to the Superman fight with Doomsday, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But he ends up, and I think that plays up strongly in John Henry's story in the book, you know, that he sees Superman's efforts and then he's inspired by them. And then he goes into the lab and he builds his suit. But Yeah, John Henry was a real person. They actually have a statue dedicated to him at a certain place, but they put it in the wrong place. It actually belongs in another place where he would have actually like lived and worked. But I got the documentation for that. I'll post it in the group for you so you can check it out.
That's why he has a hammer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
And I really like, and he actually was the one I think who had the most character development. I think long term.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I actually, not to jump ahead of us a bit, but his series after this whole thing was a pretty good series.
Yeah, it was.
I liked it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of my favorite, okay, so I thought the real Superman was going to be the Kryptonian, just because everyone in my school thought it was going to be the Cyborg. Mm-hmm. Did you think it was going to be the Cyborg, LaMar? Or did people around you?
Well, where I was, like in the LCS and stuff, and when we would talk about it in school, everybody thought it was going to be the Cyborg for two reasons. Number one, he had the original costume, and number two, Doomsday, like there had never really been a time where Superman's body had been put through rigors like this before. So people were just like, well, he's got to be the real one because he's in his costume, but then he has all these mechanical parts because his body got messed up. And you got to remember, we're in the 90s now, so all of that stuff is in vogue, right? So people are just like going crazy with the extreme stuff. So yeah, that was pretty much the talk. But I'm like, it was either between him or the Eradicator, or the Kryptonian, who we know is the Eradicator now. But then I was like, this guy is like going around like shooting people with beams out of his hands and frying them. Like, so like, I don't think that, what I mean?
So that's okay. So to answer my own question, my favorite one is Superboy because I was 10. Mm-hmm. I was 10, and this Superboy was a kid, and Superboy was going, "Don't call me boy," and I, at 10 years old, was going, "Don't call me kid." Right?
And his book was actually good too. Like when it first started, yeah, it was a good book.
Yeah, both books were pretty good. I thought, but I thought that Superman was the Eradicator because I thought the Cyborg was too obvious. So it could only be the Eradicator because there was no way they were going to change his appearance too much. It was so only two of them looked like him. Mm-hmm. And then Roger Stern had that one issue, this one brilliant issue in the Fortress where you think it's the Eradicator studying all of the Supermen. Mm-hmm. But turns out it's not the Eradicator. Mm-hmm. It's actually Kal-El.
Yeah.
That was brilliant.
Yeah.
And another thing I wanted to bring up, LaMar, you're right. The one who is the most like Superman in terms of character is John Henry. Mm-hmm. And I think the fact that no one thought that John Henry was going to be Superman, I think that says a lot about us as a human race.
I wasn't going to go there, but hey,
And I was saying to Doy earlier on, there's actually a red herring there as well for a case to be made for John Henry being Superman, because in the flashback that you see of Superman rescuing John Henry when he falls off the girders, they've drawn a flash of light passing between Superman and John Henry, which could be interpreted as like, oh, he's sending his soul into him or something like that.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. So, there was a part too with the Eradicator where he first makes his appearance and he appears to that guy in the alley, and the guy's like, he's got a gun out or whatever, and he's trying to stop him from committing a crime. And so the guy's basically looking at him and he's like, yeah, that's a nice cape. Like, who you supposed to be, Zorro or somebody like that? And then his hands start glowing, and then he hits him when he's trying to run away with his beam. And he's like, wait a minute, you're not Superman. you know, because Superman hits people. He doesn't shoot them with beams or whatever. You know what I mean? So it was like these little hints when you go back and look at it. They would put those little bits in there to kind of let you know where stuff might have been going. But you know, we didn't have message boards and stuff like that then, so it was all guesswork anyway. You know.
Mm.
It was nice guesswork. Oh, that's another thing, because I was coming from the Silver Surfer, and Silver Surfer was always shooting stuff out of his hands.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, cool. They're turning Superman into the Silver Surfer now. That's much cooler than coming out of his eyes.
Yeah, but and the other thing too is that you remember the Superman arcade game? Does anybody remember that?
With the two Supermen?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the other one has the regular Superman, and then the one who has the Captain Marvel color scheme.
Yeah.
But because in the original game he was actually supposed to be Captain Marvel, I think. But
really?
I think so. Yeah.
Oh wow.
I'd have to double check that one, but I think that it was supposed to be Superman and Captain Marvel in the game. But in that game, you remember he had the charge up beam, and when he would throw his punch, it would go flying across the screen. It was like the energy ball, and that's kind of like what the Eradicator had in the comic.
That's cool. Who is the most 90s of the four Supermen?
Ooh, maybe the Eradicator. I don't know, or maybe Cyborg. They're both pretty 90s.
Yeah.
Or maybe the kid.
I think it's
Yeah.
Superboy. I think it's Superboy.
Yeah.
I think his whole visual presentation is like 100% 90s. Like everything, the haircut, the earring, and the jacket, and all of that. Yeah, the attitude and everything.
Do we like how Superboy was redesigned like later on? Like, you know, like I personally don't really get how he goes from this. If you take away his jacket, it's actually a decent costume.
Yeah.
Take away his jacket, it's a decent costume, and maybe unfold the gloves. But then they just put him in a t-shirt and jeans, and that's just not inspired.
I guess he was like the sort of emo Superboy.
And he got bigger. He got bigger for some reason.
Yeah.
Like, how'd that happen?
I like the idea that version of Superboy with a t-shirt is a sort of specific kind of mid-2000s fashion, but with the original Cornell from the 90s, it's almost like they threw every 90s fashion at him. Like, you know,
the haircut,
dressed him as the 90s.
the haircut, the earrings, the shades. I love it.
Yeah.
I love every bit of it. Yeah. LaMar, when Steel gets his own series, he stops wearing the S.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of that decision?
I thought that it was a good direction to go in, because by the time he gets his own series, he's kind of grown into his own character. And so even though he's still under that umbrella, so to speak, because, you know, in subsequent his subsequent appearances, he still keeps like the motif. He has the suit and the red cape and all of that, and the hammer. So everything's essentially the same. But that basically was symbolic of him actually becoming his own character. Not necessarily to the extent of like Wally West growing out of the Flash's out of Barry's shadow, you know, not quite to that extent, but he had established himself as his own character with his own motivations and things. And so when he did it, you know, I thought it was dope that they would do that, because now it creates this thing where in essence he's still attached to Superman, because that's where he gets his start, and that was Superman was his inspiration. But also he has his own personal things that his own personal endeavors and aspirations and stuff as a hero, and he's able to pursue those free of having to see him doing things, and then Superman's kind of in the background floating in the sky as a silhouette. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I thought it was an important move to make.
Paul, the Cyborg, ends up being a Green Lantern villain.
But I like that. I loved him as a Superman villain. I loved whenever he turned up in 90s Superman comics. It was great. And I loved that redesign they did of him when he was all red as well, red and black. That was a fantastic color scheme for him. But then as a Green Lantern villain, I think that's valid because he destroyed Green Lantern's hometown. So that's a big, that's a big, strong case for him to be a Green Lantern villain. But we were talking earlier on about in the New 52, they tried to make him a Supergirl villain for a while. Did you hear about this, LaMar?
No. You know what? I take that back. I do care about it because you talking about it. So yeah, please continue.
Tell him. This is funny.
It is ridiculous. And in the New 52, they reinvented the Cyborg Superman as Zor-El, Supergirl's dad, and made her a Supergirl. Yes, that face sums it up. Yeah, it was daft, and I think they've ignored that now. They've brought the original Cyborg back, which is good. But for a while, the idea was that when Brainiac took Argo City from Krypton, he, for some reason, made Zor-El like his scout, his advanced scout, and turned him into Cyborg Superman. But like, why would he make Zor-El look like his nephew? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that's kind of wow, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But thankfully, they've brought the real Cyborg Man back. So that's
It's kind of strange that out of the 5 characters introduced in Death and Return of Superman, the ones that are least used are the Eradicator and Doomsday.
Yeah.
You'd think.
I think they're the weakest, though, because the Eradicator kind of had his story, didn't he, before? Like him becoming a sort of more like Superman was kind of the end of his story, or its story. So there was nowhere really to go for him after that.
Well, you know what else is that the design for the Eradicator after they get rid of the Superman resemblance. I mean, he's a balding dude in a black and blue jumpsuit.
Yeah.
Like all sense of dynamism is lost.
Yeah. I enjoyed how they made him join the Outsiders for a while.
Oh yeah,
which sort of it sort of sums up like we don't know what to do with this character. Like, he's joined the Outsiders. Like.
All right. When that's all done, eventually, after Roger Stern pulls off that one issue where he tricks you into thinking that you're reading the Eradicator, turns out you're reading Kal-El. Kal-El comes back powerless in a black suit, and then he goes and helps them out and takes down the Cyborg with big giant guns. If you told anyone in a vacuum that Superman would be in a black suit holding big giant guns, they would all say you're crazy. But somehow these guys made it work, right?
Yeah.
Well, sort of, because he doesn't actually use the guns for anything, does he? I don't remember him actually shooting someone.
Yeah, like he didn't really have to use them that much because once he got out of the fortress or whatever, his power started coming back. And so, of course, I guess, he probably was like, man, I don't need these, man. I'm feeling pretty good. I mean, because the guy's he's been laying in a box for, I guess, months, right? So, he probably wanted to, to just be like, yeah, let me do it like I used to do it and shake this dust off, But yeah, he didn't really use it. I think he might have used them like once or twice, and then he just didn't use them anymore.
At the very end, when he was when they were inside Henshaw's lair, and Henshaw was controlling all of the machines inside, which is how he takes down Steel, and also how he takes down Superboy, because Superboy can't control it with his tactile telekinesis. So eventually, by the end, it's just Superman and the Eradicator taking down the Cyborg, and Eradicator gives up his life, gives Superman his powers back, and then Superman has to kill the Cyborg. What are our thoughts on that? Because he basically punches a hole right through him and says, no prison is going to hold you, so I'm just going to shake my hand so much that all your molecules are going to scatter.
It's sort of like, it's weird because like the story required it. Like what the Cyborg did was so horrible that you needed that sort of catharsis, that definite ending of him getting beaten. But they kind of half-assed it because the Cyborg was, as he was getting shaken, was going, "I'll survive," and Superman's like, "Yeah, you probably will." You know. so, so there's that sort of get out clause that they write in, even as Superman's doing it. They're both acknowledging that he'll probably survive.
Yeah, but it's funny because like there is like a whole thing where Superman shouldn't kill, doesn't kill, etc. And in this story, he blatantly has to go for it.
Yeah.
What makes it more excusable this time?
Well, I think that get out clause, as half-assed as it is, I think just paying lip service to it, like in Man of Steel, the film, if Zack Snyder just had a line where Zod was like, "I'll probably get better."
You're gonna snap my neck. I'm gonna get better.
Yeah, and Superman was like, "Yeah, I imagine you probably will," and I think that would have, quelled a lot of the disagreement with it. Just have that little get out clause, that little back door for people to say, "Oh, he didn't really kill him, really." I think that's enough, as much as it lip service as it was.
Yeah, because he was sitting there and he was doing his fist like this, and then and then he's like, well, this won't kill me, that, don't you? And he's like, yeah, man, I know, man, I'm going to bed, man. Just go ahead,
I want to see Lois.
Yeah.
Come back some other time. All right. Who is your favorite writer and artist throughout this whole run? And remember, after Funeral and just in time for Rain, Jerry Ordway leaves as writer and Carl Kiesel takes over. So, yeah. So who was your favorite writer and artist throughout this whole run?
Dan Jurgens for me, writer and artist. I'm influenced mainly by his issues were the only ones I could get access to as a kid. So I think that probably influences me a bit. But even today, his art and his issues, like I find the most sort of aesthetically pleasing. Like the whole kind of stuff growing out of a cyborg Superman. I love all that, and just the way he drew people's faces as well. I just love Dan Jurgens.
I think he was the big brain behind the whole thing. He was kind of their captain. What are you, LaMar?
I think for me, it's a two-way tie with the artist, but I think the writer, I'm gonna go with Paulie with Dan Jurgens, but with the artist, it's a two-way tie for me between Tom Grummett and John Bogdanove. Yeah, because I've always been a Tom Grummett fan. I think he's one of the more underrated Superman artists. And he doesn't really get mentioned a lot with guys that put in quality work. And
my God, he's so good. He's such a good artist.
Yeah. He really, really is. Like he and Kerry Gamble are like the two that I always point to. That I'm like, yeah, I think especially like there was a point where George Perez was doing inks like on his covers and stuff like that, and those covers look great.
There's one classic Kerry Gamble cover where Superman is bouncing bullets off.
Yeah. And there's one that I love that's I think it was an Action Comics cover where Superman's standing there, but he has on like his suit is like he has on like a grayscale suit, and he's just kind of standing there in the shadows, just like the way he drew the figure. I was like, wow, this guy's good,
Yeah, I did not get Bogdanove when I was so Tom Grummett was my favorite too, but I did not get Bogdanove at all when I was younger. I appreciate his work more now. Did you guys like that kind of style back then already?
I loved how he drew Lex Luthor too. Funnily enough, because he just went all out with the hair, and that's one of the things that stuck with me. So I always enjoyed seeing him. And there's that really great bit where like Lex Luthor 2's standing with like what is it, White Rabbit, the villain?
White Rabbit.
Yeah, standing with her in his arms, and they just both look really cool. So yeah, I really enjoyed his work when I was a kid, and still
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, like it's like when I look at it now, because like all of his work was like he had a lot of power in the way that he would position his characters and things like that. And even when they weren't doing a whole lot, like everything just kind of seemed bigger than life. But when I look back on it now, there's some really good stuff there that you wouldn't expect to see with like an artist who like draws all of these big things, because a lot of times those guys are good for like splash pages and stuff. But when you go back and actually like look at things like the facial expressions and there's subtleties there that you don't see in a lot of those people who have those bombastic styles like that. So it's really interesting looking back on it. And when I was looking back over it for this, I was like, wow, this guy's I always liked him, but he's a lot better than I remembered him being.
Yeah, like I didn't get him, but I think when I started reading his work again, like a few years ago, tried reading Death and Return of Superman again, the way he does close-ups, there's just so much expression to it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I appreciated that as a kid because I was coming from the George Perez, John Byrne school of art, where that's the only good style of art. It's got to be that, anatomically correct, realistic, etc.
Yeah.
And that's why Tom Grimmett was my favorite and still is. But I love them all. They're all so good at what they do.
Absolutely.
Like we didn't mention Butch Guice enough, but like that guy was only going to get better. Like his work on Captain America much later on, like that guy was only going to get better. Dan Jurgens was always solid. My favorite writer. So this was an outtake from the Carl Kiesel interview. He told me this afterwards, and I hope I'm not misquoting him. He told me this afterwards when I turned the recording off. I hope I'm not misquoting him. But the way those worked was Mike Carlin was organizing all of them, and they all had different priorities. Dan Jurgens was the guy who was like kind of leading the overall direction. Carl Kiesel was putting in the fun and the adventure and everything, and I think you can see that with Superboy. And Wheezy, Louise Simonson, was doing, the more emotional, personal stuff. And Roger Stern was the guy who took all of those books and said, what are the plot holes? What's missing? What's inconsistent? And fixed it. So basically, from my takeaway from that is that those books were consistent because of two people, Mike Carlin and Roger Stern.
Yeah.
I've already mentioned Roger Stern wrote that issue, which was to me like a magic trick. Like I thought I was reading the Eradicator. Like a few issues later, I realized, oh crap, that wasn't the Eradicator. That was Kal-El this whole time. So for me, Roger Stern was my favorite, and is basically my favorite writer of superhero comics in the 80s and 90s. Anyway, what are our closing thoughts on the death and return of Superman? So I'm going to start this one this time. I think it is amazing. Like, I don't think that I don't think anyone planned for this to happen this big, but they're still using people from this storyline.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And they're adapting the story. Like, Steel is still being used. Steel was a big part of 52. Steel is still being used. When you ask about who the best inventor in all of the DC universes, just pure like mechanical inventions, the answer is probably Steel. Superboy is an essential part of the Teen Titans now. He just is. And the Cyborg Superman is a threatening villain. And whenever Doomsday shows up, like, you're in trouble. So the only one that you don't really use is the Eradicator. Like, that's amazing, especially for something that was an accident. The death of Superman wasn't supposed to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, LaMar.
I think, one thing I do want to touch on is like the aftermath. There was a scene where, like, I guess when Superman comes back and he's actually like going back into, his own, like he's coming back into the world. And Lois is in the bed and she's laying there. She hadn't had good sleep. And then she hears like a tap on the window and she thinks it's a bird. and then he's standing there, and then they kind of embrace and they're kissing, and they're like flying through the air and they're twirling like that. Like that seemed like something that was out of the first Superman movie with Christopher Reeve. Like, you know what I mean?
Her
That was
shoe
just like a
falls off. Her shoe falls off.
yeah,
It's such a
and the
great
shoe falls
detail.
off. Yeah, yeah.
Great
It was
detail, yeah.
that was fantastic. That particular scene was fantastic. I mean, he comes in and he's in there taking a shower, and then she's like, "Well, have you talked to talked to your parents or whatever?" And he's like, "I called them before I came to see you." But then when I first read it, I was like, you know what? Maybe he should have just went and seen his parents. But then I was like, wait a minute, that wouldn't have been a good idea because they both would have probably had heart attacks, you know. So yeah, calling him was the best move. That was really smart, but especially after what his father had just went through and
Yeah.
that was a great issue, by the way. But yeah, I mean this whole storyline had such an effect, not just on pop culture in America, but pop culture all over the planet, and it actually affected industries. Like there were like for the when you bought the bagged comic and it had the armband in it, uh, you couldn't get that the ribbon that they used to make those bands with. You couldn't get that ribbon for months because of how many they used to put in those issues. Like you couldn't find it anywhere, and just things like that. And of course, the pernicious influence on the speculators market that we're still kind of dealing with today.
Yeah.
But yeah, but there hasn't really been anything like it since, and there wasn't really anything like it before that until you get to, unless you're talking about like Superman and Action Comics #1 and the invention of the superhero. That's really the only thing I could really compare it to, you know. And like you said, the influence of it, and we're talking about something that took place 30 years ago, and it's still being felt pretty much all across the board. Like that's amazing for a comic story, you know, to become a part of the way, become a part of like people's worldview in that way, and to still have those effects. That's just amazing. Just
They
looking back on it.
they keep trying to do it with other superheroes. They tried to do it with Nightfall,
Yeah.
which was well received, but it didn't make the waves that Death of Superman did. They tried to do
Yeah.
it with the Spider Clone Saga, which
Mhm.
we're not going to talk about. They tried to do it with Wonder Woman, where they replaced her with Artemis. They just keep trying to do it with everyone.
Yeah.
God knows they replaced Captain America like 8 times,
Mhm.
but it just doesn't have the same impact as the death and return of Superman.
I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but and I don't want to come across like I'm like one of these people like comics were perfect when I was 12, and they're rubbish now, because I don't think that's true, because I
Well, I
love
don't know.
comics
Would you give
today. So.
Would you give anyone an action figure funeral now?
Well, no, I wouldn't. Well, but that's kind of what I'm saying, because I think at the time, comics as a whole were in a place where this was one of the first big events. You had stuff like Crisis, but on a sort of more personal, focused level, you didn't have events like this. So, for example, when they blew up Coast City, like now, I'd be like, I think even if I was younger, if I was a kid now, I'd have access to the internet. I would have seen everyone's cynical opinions. I don't think that would have been had the impact on me as it did then, because when they blew up Coast City in Return of Superman, that was the first time ever, possibly the only time I've gone, did they just do that? I don't believe they did that. I was just absolutely gobsmacked. I was like, is this an Elseworld or something? I just couldn't believe it. And you couldn't have that feeling now, even if you're a kid, I think, just because of the internet, just because everyone's cynicism gets spread, just because the amount of events they've had since then, like you said, the amount of times they've tried to replicate it.
You know what else? Even if you avoided social media, you would see the previews.
Exactly. Yeah, you'd see the previews now as well. But also, I think back then, and again, I don't want to sound like an old fart, because I love comics today as well. It's mainstream superhero comics today. I love them too. But back then, they took the time to explore the consequences of stuff a bit more, and they played the long game a bit more, and they were a lot better. Like you were talking about Roger Stern pulling everything together, they were a lot better at doing that back then. So, you know, you could have all these issues exploring the after effects of Superman's death before you brought him back. And I don't think you'd have that in the same way now. They wouldn't take the time to slow everything down and just check on how everybody was feeling about what just happened. And also, like, they played the long game with stuff. Like, there's a bit in the funeral issues where Luthor kills a fitness instructor because she beat him in a sort of sparring match, and he goes into the locker room and kills her, and just gloats to himself later on by Superman's coffin and saying, "I killed that woman, and you're dead, and you can't do anything about it." And nowadays, I think that would be the last you heard of it. But then eventually, a few years later, that ended up being one of the things that brought Luthor down, was Lois investigating the death of this random woman. And you don't get stuff like that now. You don't get like long-term payoffs, because I don't think writers and creators stay with the books long enough to do that kind of thing. So for lots of reasons, I think, you know, the death of Superman.
A lot of creators now, like, they want to instill their own, and this is not a knock against that, but they want to instill their own supporting cast into their run. They want to instill their own direction. So whatever happened, especially in DC books, where things are kind of more fluid than the Marvel books, that's where it kind of is what you're saying. There's not a long game.
You know, and another thing too, because, you know, things just move so fast now. The stories move fast, the creators and stuff, you know, all that stuff moves fast. But speaking on what Paulie was talking about, there was a part in there too that where Lex Luthor was like, and going back to what you were saying about him playing his son and all of that, there was a part where he was like, you know, he basically goes and he's like, "I don't really believe you're dead, because I knew that if you died, I would be the one responsible for it," you know, and stuff like that. And I think that was the point where I was like, wait a minute, I think that's actually Lex. I don't think that's his son, you know. But yeah, just because things move so quickly now, man, it's hard to do things like that, because it takes a lot of preparation for them and things like that. And there's a lot of consideration that happens. And, you know, like we see how, like, even when they did the New 52, like, it wasn't, you know, it was kind of done like at the last minute, and they just kind of tacked the ending on to Flashpoint, because after that there was supposed to be a new Flash team book that was supposed to come out of that, but because of the things that just kind of happened, they had to hurry up. But because there's this sense of urgency that's created now, it's hard to do stuff like that, and that's probably why you'll never see it again.
I'm surprised in modern comics. I am surprised when I'm surprised, which is not to say that they can't do it, because they have been. Like, when Peter Parker and Dr. Octopus switched bodies.
Yeah.
Didn't see that coming.
Yeah, that was great.
Because
that was really good.
And it was great because we didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
But I don't know how they managed to hide that from, like, the previews, the solicits, insiders who probably leak things on the internet. I don't know how they managed to hide it.
Yeah.
And so it's just for that reason, I just think it's so much harder to keep a secret now. Like I said, like, if they killed Superman now, they would have to play it as if he was really dead, and then nobody would believe them. But they would have to, because then people would just be waiting for him to come back to life the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they probably would have to run with that a few years, you know, where it wouldn't be like an immediate thing that's undone in a couple of months. Like, they would have to, you know, make it where people's mindsets are shifted to, like, okay, maybe this guy ain't coming back, you know, and then out of nowhere, like, bam, here you go, you know.
Oh yeah, like they did with evil Captain America.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's exactly what they did. They tried to pretend he was a real Captain America, even though you knew he wasn't gonna be. I'm talking to you, viewers, comic book readers. You knew he wasn't gonna be evil. He's played by Chris Evans in the movies. People love him too much. You knew it. All right. Any closing thoughts on? Yeah, go ahead.
One last question that we have, probably the most important thing we haven't covered. Superman with long hair. What are your thoughts?
I clearly like long hair, so I was like, nice, Superman with long hair. But this is before I discovered the concept of a mullet and how mullets are lame. So now, not so cool. What do you guys think? Yeah.
When he came back, I tried to grow my hair to look like him. I think I actually showed the hairdresser a picture of Superman with long hair and said, how can I look like this? And so I started growing it, but like, I cannot emphasize it. Sorry. Why am I like this?
Yo, I don't have nothing to say, man. Listen, you can cut it off after this, man, because I'm not coming behind that. This is the greatest bookend I've ever seen in an interview of any kind, anywhere. We had the burial first. Now we got Paulie trying to grow a mullet. I'm done, man. I'm done. Pull the sidewalks in, man.
But I didn't succeed because I cannot emphasize enough how alien the concept of long hair was to South Wales in the early 90s. For some reason, like my classmates did not like it. And so I constantly had people saying, why don't you get your hair cut? Why do you get your hair cut? And of course, I wasn't going to tell them the real reason I was growing it. And then they started pulling it then. So I got it cut. So my super mullet was never to...
And with that story, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Please click like, share, and subscribe.